as a social. Yeah. Then, but its turn towards religion might categorize and might make us categorize him as a conservative. And in many ways, he is a radical and a revolutionary. So, just for the benefit of the audience, how would you categorize Ambedkar on the ideological spectrum?
Well, first of all, thank you for having this opportunity, for giving me this opportunity. 22 years exactly after I wrote my book. So this is the kind of anniversary. That's the French edition, but it is available in English, in Hindi, in Marathi, in Tamil, and very soon in Punjabi as well. So it can be read also, and it's very important for that to be in a position to read it in vernacular languages. Well, you can't easily place Ambedkar on the kind of left or right axis. It doesn't work. And he was particularly, quote unquote, allergic to Marxism, in spite of being very close to some peace, including lawyer, who was one of his favorite partners in crime during the British Raj and after. But he was certainly not in favor of Marxism because he considered that, well, communism, Marxism, focuses too much on plans that ignores the building block of society. That is you said because of his conversion, he can be seen as a conservative. We may return to that in detail. This conversion to Buddhism is really a revolutionary decision that he made for the most substantial change we can think of. And when he explained what Buddhism means for him, he said, in Buddhism, I have found liberty, equality, and fraternity. Of course, this is something we know. And therefore, I really don't think that these two place him on the usual radar screen. He speaks from any square, but he speaks for the emancipation of the human being, whoever they are, in the first place, the
Since we talked about liberty, equality, and fraternity, one constant source of inspiration for Ambedkar seems to have been the French Revolution. If I'm not wrong, it was during the Mahar Satyagraha that he compared the Mahar Satyagraha to the French Revolution.
The first one, yes.
Yes. Yeah. 20. Yeah. But I do feel there is a qualitative difference between the two. And would it be right to say that while the Mahar Satyagraha, I would say, entrenched group rights towards over natural resources, over water, over public spaces, it entrenched group rights towards the Dalit community. In comparing it with the French Revolution would be a bit of a stretch because the lasting legacy of the French Revolution has been the institutionalization of individual rights. So, what do you think?
Yes and no. When you think about the French Revolution, the third estate as a group is asking for its rights to decide who will govern. So we are in a society of orders, very similar to the caste system, in spite of huge differences. But the notion of individual rights, of course, is there with the philosophers, like Rousseau and others. But those who will be doing the revolution in 1789 act as a group against the aristocrats, against the king. And on the other hand, when Ambedkar is in charge of drafting the Constitution of India, he will spend a lot of time on what he will call the fundamental right. And these fundamental rights certainly are group-oriented, access to wealth, access to restaurants, access to any public. But individual rights are also freedom of expression, freedom of consciousness, freedom to convert. That's an individual decision that you make. Yes. So On the one hand, the revolutionaries of France were not so individualistic. On the other hand, it was also somewhat individualistic.
Yes. So, sir, I had a chance to read a recent book by Ashok Gopal, Part Apart. In my opinion, it's one of the better works.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Wonderful.
And in that book, he says that there was a kind of tension within Ambedkar because of the two roles that he sought to play. First, the role of a statesman, when it comes to the drafting of the constitution, or even I would say when it comes to the choice of religion, he was always conscious of the impact of his conversion on the rest of society. So he took these decisions in the role as a statesman. And the other role that he sought to play was as the protector of the interests of the Dalit community, of the ex-untouchable community. And Ashok Gopal suggests that he was torn from inside because these two roles are very different to play. Just to extend that allegory, do you feel that there's a similar kind of tension between the two causes he has followed? One is, let's say, the annihilation of caste versus the, what can I say, like the, yeah, yes, yeah, where what he wrote in 1935, yeah. And again, the need to protect the social political advancement of the different classes. Do you feel that there is a kind of contradiction? Scholar like at one point probably the agenda to annihilate caste became secondary. What do you feel about
Well, he was coming to many more tensions, you know, and for good reason. When you have a priority, the way it was a priority, you have to draw the lines on every ground. Number one, can you ignore class when you fight for the Dalits? He was constantly oscillating between the progressive socioeconomic decisions, reforms that have to be made. And as a member of the Bombay Presidency Legislative Assembly, just 37, he fought for the abolition of bonded labor. Yes. And he created, at that time, the Independent Labour Party. Then he shifted to caste-oriented action, and he created the Scheduled Caste Federation. Ideology on the one hand, Scheduled Caste Federation on the other hand, oscillating between I'm working for the poor, I'm working for the workers, I'm working for the laborers. No, I'm working for the Dalits. And then he will shift once again when he creates the Independent Republican Party, right? Republican Party. And then he's back to something different. There's no caste name in his party's name anymore. One tension. Class or caste. The workers or the Dalits. Another one. Should he collaborate with the dominant elite group, or should they fight them head on? He will oscillate between the two. He'll be torn by that even more, probably, yes, than by the first thing. Yes. Remember, he was accused of betraying the Indian nation by the Congress. Because he was prepared to have the communal award implemented in 1932, when the British gave a separate electorate to the Dalits. He was for it. He was pro-British. But how can you be pro-British when you are in a colonized country that is fighting for its independence? So he was torn constantly, and he had to make sure that he is not seen as a traitor, traitor for the Indian nation. So, under the British Raj, he had this problem. After independence, he still had this problem. When, because of Mahatma Gandhi, Nehru appoints him as Minister of Law, Law Minister. He's collaborating. He's part of the government. So he is with the Congress-dominated policy that has to be implemented. And he can be called an opportunist. But he's not an opportunist. He's a pragmatic. And the difference is that you collaborate with the dominant group to make your point on the top of the agenda and not at the bottom of the agenda. And if he had not been part of this government, he would not have been part of the drafting committee. He would not have made the drafting. So he was torn, but he found a kind of compromise. And last but not least, he was also torn as you said, when conversion comes on his own agenda. 1935, he said, "I will not die a Hindu," but he will not convert before 1956. 21 years to think about it. He tried everything. He thought about Islam, he thought about Sikhism, he thought about, of course, the best solution was this. But he did not come so quickly. And one of the reasons why, as you said, he thought about the context, the impact. Well, if you go for Islam, it will make such a big change
in the context of
in
partition.
the context of what? He was very much concerned. Christianity out of question, because then you are on the colonizer side. In spite of the fact that so many Dalits benefited so much from Christian missions.
Yes, yeah.
And were so much acknowledged that. Yes. So. But yes, finally, Buddhism, very, very late in the day, but that was, he was not torn anymore. He was certainly at peace with himself.
So you just mentioned how he was basically accused of betraying the nation.
Yeah.
So not joining his trust with the Congress. So you can call him the original anti-national.
Yeah.
And then anyone who is being accused of being that should actually wear it as a So you talked about constitution and his legacy. He's widely known as the father of the Indian Constitution. Let's problematize that a bit. In 1945 or 6, Ambedkar writes a book called States and Minorities, which is considered to be his ideal version of what the Indian Constitution should look like. And if you just carry out a simple study between the Indian Constitution at present and what he had suggested, I would say like 2/3 of what he wanted in the Constitution did not make it into the Constitution. So in that context, how fair is it to call it Ambedkar's Constitution? Not because he was definitely the person who labored the most to make the Indian Constitution. Everyone recognized that. But what he himself wanted in the Constitution is absent in large parts. And when that equation between Ambedkar and Constitution is made, do you see that as a very, what you can say, a very clever, I would say, a co-option of a universal icon as a constitution by the Dalit political movement? Or do you see it as an elite co-option? Do you see it as a subaltern appropriation of a universal value? Co-option of associating Ambedkar with the constitution, and therefore, in a way, disassociating all the revolutionary or the tensions at the bottom of society.
Well, this is a revolutionary constitution. And if it was implemented, it would have made a revolutionary change. The program is implemented. And if in Sheinbag and everywhere, when there is a protest, if you see the constitution in the end of the protesters, it's precisely because it has this potential. Now, it could not be this. Number one, he wanted secularism. He wanted to return to third state. And Vallabhbhai Patel was there. And he backed. He gave up. He gave up very quickly. And that's one of my surprises. That was one of my surprises when I read the Constituent Assembly debates. I thought he would have given a fight. He did not. He preferred to resign himself through reservations. And that was typical of the kind of compromise he was able to make on some issues. On others, he was absolutely straight. When you look at these fundamental rights, really, they are very, very powerful. And when you look at what others wanted in the fundamental rights, and that he refused to have in the fundamental rights, but put in the directive principle, very important. Self-protection, for instance. The Indians were very upset. You had so many Gambian members of the parliament who said, "Who is that man who is deciding for us in spite of what we think? Because we are the Congress, we got freedom, and he's dictating us in his own terms." So yeah, it's difficult to say whether the glass is half full or half empty, but definitely I would not buy the idea of corruption because the text has the potential of being revolutionary. But you remember what he said when it was passed finally? He said, "Well, now we have a text. It will make no difference if we don't change it." And it was very true. And he was so disillusioned after a couple of years. So
Also, it's important to note when we see he could not, let's say, put in the constitution his own desired content. It was almost as if it was an impossible task.
Yeah.
You have spent your entire life fighting the Congress, and the Constituent Assembly has a super majority of Congress, like more than 4/5 of the members are belonging to the political opposition. How can you convince them to put in your agenda? So it's a so, sir, Ambedkar has described the caste system as a system of graded inequality. If I'm not wrong, in your own writings, you have called this discovery as the main sociological finding of Dr. Ambedkar, that caste system is graded inequality. For the benefit of the audience, could you just tell us how graded inequality works?
Yeah.
And how resistance against graded inequality is, let's say, different from more, I would say, not agreed graded inequality.
Yeah. No, this is another dimension of Ambedkar that we should never underestimate. He is a social thinker. He is the Pakka social thinker. He is a great. He is a great social. Probably the first anthropologist, in fact. The first paper he wrote for his MA in Colombia, well, taking sides. It is something M.N. Srinivas, the first official anthropologist of Kenya, will put on the paper in his own way after doing fieldwork, but it is what he has seen from a distance by reading text. And what does he say? The higher and the I. We want to dominate the lowest, the lower, and the low. And the lowest wants to emulate the lower, who wants to emulate the low, who wants to emulate the high, who wants to emulate the high, who wants to emulate the high. That is the capacity of the class system to somewhat poor. Those who are at the bottom of society to look up and try to be like the one at the top, or like the one who is just above. But it is what we have to describe as capitalism. And why is it different from tradition? Russia's October Revolution in 1915, France, the 1989 revolution, because there are so many strata. You can't find a block of people who are sufficiently determined to change society. This is another sentence that is remarkable in the class system is not only a division of labor, it is a division of the laborer. When you've understood this, it's so profound. The third estate in France was a majority black. The peasantry in Tsarist Russia was a majority black. Low caste Hindus could not form the coalition. Because among the Dalits themselves, you have the Chambars and the Mons. All the Chambars, the Mons, the Mons are competition all the time. How do you form a unity that makes revolution possible. But this is so powerful. Nobody had said it before. This man, this young man, invented a concept of sociology or anthropology. We still live on it, but nobody recognizes it. Professional sociologists don't think he's a sociologist.
In fact, one of my, I would say, one of the most influential professors I had in my life was my sociology professor, someone who actually combined her field work with her academic understanding, and someone who had what I would say an eye for, let's say, what is happening at the margins. She graduated from Delhi University in the 1980s, early 90s. And she said they didn't have a single text on Ambedkar while doing a master's in sociology. I was like, how is that possible? How can you study Indian society without studying his impact?
You know, till 2000,
yes,
there was one biography of Ambedkar by Kerr, 1954. Even if there was no biography of Ambedkar, except, of course, books by Eleanor Zilliot or Gail Omveit. But Eleanor's PhD had not been published
till 2004, I think. Yeah.
And Gail's books were on Dalits in a more general perspective. The biography of Ambedkar. You know, you had thousands of biographies of Nehru, of Savarkar, of Patel, of Gandhi. So it's very revealing, I think, of this kind of neglect. Let's call it neglect.
So as you pointed out, that it's very difficult to form a uniform block, especially in a caste society. And one way through which Ambedkar tried to do that was by experimenting with these different, I would say, nomenclatures. So he accepted some of the nomenclatures that the British authority had brought in. So he seems to have taken in the nomenclature of depressed classes. Later on, the British created a list of all ex-untouchable castes as scheduled castes. So he seems to have, embraced that. But in his own way, he also tried to create new identities. So his first organization was called as the Bahishkrut Hitakarni Sabha. Bahishkrut more or less translates to the ostracized. Later on, of course, he ends up being he gives the ultimate umbrella identity, that of being a Buddhist. So what do you think of these, this project of naming and renaming of a community, and how it helps a community to look back at itself?
It does. It does. He used different words, indeed. He used the word untouchables. Untouchable is a word he used in the title of one of his best books, Sounds of the Ghetto, ostracization again. He uses, of course, the word Dalit. He coined the word Dalit. So he indeed experimented different ways to encapsulate the specificity of being below this line that is stronger than any other line within the caste system. You may be a Shudra, well, if you're a Maratha, if you're a Patel, if you're a Reddy, if you're a Kamma, if you're a Okaliga, if you're a Lingayat, well, you're dominant caste in spite of being a Shudra. You may be a Mahar, you are below a different kind of line, red line. So that was his attempt at creating this category. None of that really worked. And he was suddenly very desperate when he realized that in his party, ILP, Federal Caste Federation, there were more Mahars than anybody else. It was seen as a Mahar party, in spite of all his attempts at bringing in Shambhars. So, conversion to Buddhism was a way to find an alternative identity. You ethnicize caste. You give to the Dalit nomenclature another identity out of the caste system.
you ethnicize. In a way, it's very similar to what the first Dravidians have done. The Periyar, these pioneers who said, well, we are not part of the caste system because we are the sons of the soil, and we have one thing in common, that is the Dravidian identity, transcending caste divisions. He used religion instead of using ethno-linguistic categories because it would not have worked. They were all Marathi speaking, so that did not work. But the idea is the same. To find an alternative identity repertoire out of caste. By the way, this is what Pule had tried also before, when he said the low caste, the non-Brahmins at that time.
Shudra, Ati-Shudra.
Yeah, Shudra, Ati-Shudra, non-Brahmin, are the sons of the soil, and therefore they should prevail. Yes. So Pule was more on the Dravidian repertoire. Ambedkar invented this alternative repertoire, and he would be today very sad to see that so few people have converted. He showed the way. Few people followed that way.
So I think though Ambedkar himself has of the three gurus that he claimed, he said that it is Buddha and it is Kabir and it is Phule that have been the intellectual guiding lights for him. But he also did not borrow them lock, stock and barrel. Especially when it comes to Phule, Phule had a racial origin theory. So did the Dravidians. They have a racial origin theory of caste, and Ambedkar does not agree with that.
No.
However, there's an interesting overlap. In a letter to the Black leader activist W.E. Du Bois in 1946, he writes, "I belong to the untouchables of India. I have been a student of the Negro problem. There is so much of similarity between the position of untouchables in India and the position of Negroes in America that the study of the latter is not only natural but is necessary." Then he goes on to say that, okay, maybe if I'm not wrong, the American activists had approached the United Nations, and he was thinking of doing something similar. So he's trying to highlight the similarity of race and caste. In his publication, which was unfortunately unpublished, People at Bay, he talks about how untouchability is worse than slavery. So I would say that, especially for a French audience who might be more sensitive to the question of race, can you just elaborate where caste and race overlap and where they do not overlap?
Yeah, that's a very complicated question. Of course, they do overlap in the sense of exclusion, and ghettoization, and the impossibility of having intermarriages, for instance. Even when you have intermarriages in the US and you're Black and your partner is white, if there is one drop of Black blood in your veins, you're on that side anyway. So this is certainly one of the similarities. The main difference, of course, is that there is no way you can recognize a Dalit in the street. There is no racial tie. And this is why it is worse. Because in spite of the fact that there is no way you can recognize a Dalit, everyone knows. So how do you explain that? One thing is the body language, the internalization of the domination that makes that you behave corporally as someone who has internalized this inferiority complex. So the body language, and the body language goes very far, the way you dress, because you're not supposed to have a mustache. You're not supposed to have chapals. You're not supposed to stay on your charpoy when someone of a higher caste pass by. You're not supposed to go near the temple. You're not supposed to, even you may remember the Mahars, could not spit on the floor. And when they arrived from the Marbasti, from the Marvada, for asking for the Bakris, they had to announce that they were coming, like the lepers during the medieval era. So you can't see that this person belongs to that group, but you can't miss it either because of all these, I repeat, internalization of the stigma. And that's why it's worse, because what you have to do is to eradicate this feeling in the first place. Assert yourself. This is easier said than done when you have millennia of domination on your shoulders. But I would like to end with the comparison, with the similarities, because the similarities will become very clear when you will see the fight for dignity on the Black sides and on the Dalit side. They learn from each other. They learn a lot. And the Dalits learn from the Black movement. First of all, to call untouchables Dalits was exactly the same trajectory than as the Black people who stopped being called niggers and decided to be called Black. Names matter. And similarly, I recently saw the biopic narrating the story of Malcolm X.
Yes.
And the similarities are also immense. Well, you can probably say that Ambedkar is a mix of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King.
Yes.
It's fascinating, because Ambedkar has never advocated violence, but he has converted to another religion, the same way Malcolm X has converted to escape his categorization. His category of life. So they've learned, and the Dalit Panthers. Dalit Panthers, of course, there's the children, if you want, of the Black Panthers. They have learned from the Black Panthers. They have read the Black Panthers. So it's a great work that should be done to have a kind of comparison of these two movements, to see the similarities as well as the differences. Yeah.
So, this will be the last question when it comes to exploring his historical legacy.
Yeah.
Then we would come to the contemporary impact of Ambedkar.
Yeah.
As you say that it's been rare, especially I would say in Western history, to associate religion with revolution. But that is what Ambedkar did.
Yeah.
He saw this as the most revolutionary thing that he could do.
Yeah.
Is to just take an entire mass of people outside a religion, outside a social structure that did not deem them to be a human.
Yeah.
How has that experience been, even post Ambedkar? And like you hinted very strongly that the closest parallel that we have is what maybe Malcolm X did and Muhammad Ali did and Elijah Muhammad did with the experiment of Nation of Islam. So are there any similarities in the trajectories of the two?
Well, the intention is very similar. You get some dignity by changing your identity, by converting to another religion. In the case of the Black leaders you've listed, there was not necessarily the same kind of rejection of religion, of the religion they were coming from. In the case of Ambedkar, remember, the oath taken by those who converted said, I reject Hinduism. And there are 22 points saying, I reject this God, this goddess. I reject this ritual. I reject. So it's more than to adhere to another religion. It's also to reject the religion you're coming from. So yes, this is definitely revolutionary. And that's why, in fact, they don't like him. Because he's the ultimate antidote to Hindutva. The real thinker who says caste is inherent in Hinduism. And therefore, if I want to be free, I have to leave this religion.
Yes. So, since you yeah. Yes. Okay. So, since you alluded to, so let's come to the contemporary questions. In recent times, across Indian university campuses, you have a spurt of what could be best described as Dalit food festivals, which basically celebrate Dalit culinary heritage. There's a more of a emphasis on the non-vegetarian foods because also some of them are specific to Dalit communities, consumption of beef, consumption of pork, etc., etc. Uh, and this is seen as an act of resistance, especially when you have an hegemonic force that is trying to control what you wear, what you eat, etc., etc. However, I would want to ask you, had Ambedkar been around and seen the Dalit food festivals happening, what would his perception of that be? Because the way I understand Ambedkar is that he wanted to erase every marker of caste. And therefore, celebrating a food because it is Dalit food, and in many cases, an imposed food. That is the only kind of food you will get because you have to eat because you are not going to get any other kind of food. So, what would have Ambedkar thought of this? That you are celebrating a caste-based food practice as a form of resistance.
Yeah, that's a very unfair question, really, because to to think along these lines is not so easy. But let's speculate. No, it's difficult to imagine what you would have done simply because the context has changed so much.
Yes.
So much. What would he do today? Well, we can imagine that it would certainly emphasize the need to convert to Buddhism, but beyond that, not too easy. But you're right. He was more a universalistic person.
Yes.
So to somewhat imprison the Dalits in their own ritual would not have been something he would be so happy with. When he said, leave the village, go to the city, what does he mean? It means in the village, you're prisoners of traditions, rituals, lifestyles. You have to be in a more anonymous environment. So you need to go to some more universalist context. In that sense, he believed in modernity. He was a firm believer in the modernization theories, to speak, because all kinds of creeds, beliefs, superstitions, he thought would go with modernity. So to insist on your lifestyle, the food you eat, of course, is much more particularist. I think you would have had a problem with that because it would have been somewhat in contradiction with his individualistic aspirations. Yeah. But it doesn't mean that it's not a good idea to do it.
Yeah.
It does not mean that it's not a good idea to do it, because how do you resist? This is the problem. How do you resist hegemony? It can only be with symbolic gestures. So it's one. There are others. Conversion is another one. But anything that shows that we stand, we are there, we are not bowing to the dominant discourse, well, it's at least helping people to get self-esteem, to retain some self-esteem.
So, again, in recent times, what has happened, I would say the decisive shift over the past 30, 40 years. I come from Maharashtra. So there used to be a time in the 1970s and 80s where if there's a new statue of Ambedkar being erected in a village, especially if you're in Marathwada, somewhere there, the possibility of that statue standing there for the next 15 days is very low. In parts of, I would say, North India today, I've seen this very curious thing where you have a statue of Ambedkar, which is surrounded by an iron cage, so that nobody comes and attacks it. So there was a kind of, and of course, you know about the Namantar movement, the demand for changing the name. You have to just change the name. You have to just add the name Ambedkar to a university. In a progressive state such as Maharashtra, that decision took 12 years. Okay, and there was rioting over why do you want a university being named after Ambedkar. This is happening in the 1980s. In the past decade or two, there's been a complete reversal of this. Now everybody is into Ambedkar iconography. Okay, everybody wants to name an institution after Ambedkar. Everybody wants to inaugurate statues and memorials, and everybody wants to appropriate the public, the public persona. I would say, like the public profile. However, I feel this is a bit of a challenge. I'm reminded of the political scientist C.E.M. Joad, who talked of socialism, of how it is a hat that everyone wears, and therefore the hat has lost its shape. Something similar might happen to Ambedkar, is what I feel. As his public profile and public visibility increases, the political message or his philosophical message might get lost. How do you counter that?
That's true. It's a way to neutralize him, to banalize him, and to stop listening to what he says. We see him, we don't hear him. We don't hear it. You know, where is this voice? Where are these words? Well, these words are so problematic for the dominant, hegemonic discourse of today. So I agree, it's a way to somewhat dilute the impact of Dr. Ambedkar. It was more interesting when there was a conflict around his own persona, because it showed that he meant revolution, some revolution. Now, it doesn't mean that for those who promote him the most. The problem is, it's also, I would say, because many Dalits themselves speak about Dr. Ambedkar and support the hegemonic structure of society. And that's new. That's really new.
What do you mean by the hegemonic structure of society?
Well, voting BJP, 1/3 of Dalits support BJP at the time of elections. It's absolutely unprecedented. Unprecedented. Never before you've seen such a large proportion of Dalits supporting BJP. So, of course, for them, it's not the revolutionary Ambedkar that they adore. It's the icon, the emblem, the symbol. Now the question is why? Why are so many people supporting BJP in spite of BJP leaders, including Mr. Birla, Speaker of the Lok Sabha, saying, well, Brahmins dominate because of their birth. So who would have dared to say something like that? Only 10, 15 years ago. So there is a change in this rehabilitation of caste hierarchy. Why are some people supporting this? There are different explanations. One, there is something you can call a Dalit bourgeoisie today. And the Dalit bourgeoisie is as hierarchical as the others. They are just trying to be the new Brahmins in a way. Two, you have on the opposite those who are at the receiving end, who are at the bottom, who have not benefited from reservation. And who are very resentful vis-a-vis those who have benefited from reservation. So you have the non-Tatars in Uttar Pradesh, Valmikis, Katiks, Parsis. And they are more than happy to vote for BJP, that is precisely the party that is fighting BSP, SP, Congress forever. It's very paradoxical. Reservations have generated supporters of elite parties because reservations have created resentment among those who have not benefited from that. Yeah. Big problem, huh?
Yes.
How do we get out of
Yeah.
that? I know.
So, since this question was about iconography, and
Yes,
this is
sorry.
just no, sir, it's just an observation. This is a very Indian thing to do. Okay, like when you let's say when you want to give one praise, instead of that you give 10 praises.
I know it takes time.
Yeah. So when I visit Ambedkar Jayanti, I see a whole you see a whole list of titles being associated to Ambedkar.
Yeah.
He is not only Bharat Ratna, he is Vishwa Ratna, global jewel. Okay, and then he is this and that. And when it comes to his Buddhist legacy, he is not referred to as Buddha anytime. He is not the enlightened one, but he is referred to as the Bodhisattva, which, according to my understanding of Buddhism, is I would say second best rank. So, would you have some thoughts about that? Why? Because Buddhism as a religion does not have the concept of blasphemy. So, if you name someone Buddha, okay, nobody's going to come after you. And just if you want to praise your leader, why not give him the highest rank? Why do you want to give him the second best rank?
Well, I think you would not have been very happy even with the
Yes, of course.
No, that's very important to keep in mind.
Yeah.
He wanted people to think by themselves.
Yes.
He was so much against all kinds of superstition, all kinds of rituals. He said, stop going to the temples. All these Dalits trying to see the deity from the veranda or from the stairs of the temple. Because he said something so true. You may get equality in death, but you should fight for equality in life. And for that, you better not go to the temple and bow to the pandits, but fight today. So, this is the problem. Well, Buddha himself would not have been very happy with this idea of bodhisattva. Why do you need intermediary? In that sense, Buddha and Martin Luther are very similar, and they are there in all religions. After some time, you need intermediaries to reach God. You think you need people who will help in the quest for salvation. No. It's an individual story, and freedom is equally an individual story. You'll get it by yourself. You don't need to have the rituals that are supposed to help.
Yes. So, sir, one of the common critiques of contemporary Dalit politics is that it focuses too much on cultural issues as opposed to material issues. If I may express it in Marxist terms, it's too superstructural in that sense. So, do you agree with this assessment? Or do you feel that the emphasis on cultural issues, it creates new possibilities of material politics?
Well, certainly, you give a name, the same name to all these people, and it creates the possibility of unity for fighting for bread and butter.
Yeah.
It's cultural, but it's also material in a way. It prepared the ground for material achievements, conversion, the same way. But I think this is indeed not supported by sufficient action for real socioeconomic change. No, BSP, when you remember Kanshira, was very much interested in equality in material terms. And BAMSEF, before BSP, and DS4, before BSP, were militant movements fighting for better pays, better housing, everything. And that's what they did when they were in power in the first place. No, 2007, Mayavati becomes Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, and she develops what? The Ambedkar villages.
Yes.
Ambedkar villages. That was something the Dalits could get. Home, land. Where is this demand? Who is asking for land reform? Who is asking for proper housing when you have so many people in slums? So yes, the dominant repertoire as well. You keep focusing on unimportant symbolic, iconic demands, forgetting the main thing, forgetting jobs, forgetting housing, forgetting land. But this is absolutely what national populism is about. National populism is about identity, not about socioeconomic achievements. Because those who articulate this discourse are conservative, are elite people who don't want to give anything. So you fight the man of the other religion, and you forget that the man who is oppressing you is of the same religion.
Since you mentioned BSP
Yeah.
and the legacy, one of the questions was that, like I said, nowadays in India, everybody wants to wants Ambedkar on their team, especially if you're a politician. So there are multiple appropriation of Ambedkar. Like there are almost like a million. I am reminded of Mao again. Like it's like 100 Ambedkar's bloom, like 100 Ambedkar's bloom, something like that. So I would like you to focus on 3 appropriations. One by the BSP, one by the Congress, very recent, and one by the BJP. All of these appropriations focus on one dimension of Ambedkar while distorting another dimension of Ambedkar. So could you just speak about these?
Well, none of them, even BSP, recognizes the revolutionary potential. Why can't BSP in the first place support conversion to Buddhism?
Yes.
When Kanchiram died, you may remember this very poignant episode. We realized that he had become a Buddhist. Who knew before?
I think Mayawati is like, we are going to emulate Ambedkar. We are going to convert right before I'm going to die.
Yes. Little bit late in the day.
Yes.
You better do it now because it would be more useful. And she did this huge park in Lucknow that, of course, many of you have visited. We are back to symbolism. We need action. We need agitation. Remember what he said. Agitate, organize, educate. By the way, this is another way to respond to your questions about what I call superstitions, rituals, lifestyle. Well, first of all, you have to get education. And education is universal education. The same education should be for everybody. Educate, agitate, organize. You may build parks, but it will not result in substantial achievements. So I think it's true of each of these parties, BSP, Congress, certainly, BJP. The last party that was probably more true than anybody to Ambedkar was VP Singh Janata Dal. And remember, 2nd of December 1989, VP Singh becomes Prime Minister of India. His speech on television, he names Ambedkar as one of his guides. 89, nobody else would have done it. Who knew Ambedkar in 89? Well, of course, Kanchiram. Kanchiram was his true disciple, but nobody else. And when VP Singh decides to implement the Mandal Commission report's recommendation, he returns to Ambedkar and he said, reservations are not a mass scheme. It's not for redistribution. We know a handful of people will benefit, but they'll be in the corridor of powers, different powers, with the bureaucracy in the first place. And they will be guides. They'll be role models. And that's what Ambedkar has been, a role model. One Ambedkar,
we are still talking about it. So I would say, before asking the next question, I would also like to respond to the I would say, the project of building Ambedkar memorials, etc. And I remember an article that I maybe I'm old enough now, so I remember an article which lampooned the people who criticized Mayawati's projects. It was, I think, written by Jayatirth Rao, if I'm not wrong. And the title of the article was "Elites Just Don't Get It." He says that in India, basically, there are very few truly public spaces. And what happens is that each community has exclusive spaces of its own. But there's only one exception to that, and there's no exclusive public space for a Dalit community. And probably this is what Mayawati is creating. For the first time, there's a public space that the Dalit can claim as their own.
No, I don't mind that. I don't mean that this is not a good idea. It's a good idea, but it should not be
the main way. Yes. So come back. Professor Jaffrelot has written the seminal book called as The Silent Revolution, which documents the stunning rise of Dalits and OBCs, especially in the political sphere, especially in the Hindi heartland. The rise was actually never silent in that sense. It was just unrecognized and unnoticed by the mainstream. There was always...
What I meant by silent revolution is it was not a revolution in the street.
Yes.
It was a revolution in
the vote. Yes, sir.
Yes.
I'm just trying to play on the silent here.
Sure, please.
Because Dalit politics today is anything but silent. I would say Dalit assertion has become the dominant idiom of Ambedkarite politics. I think contemporary Dalit politics has completely, ignored Deng Xiaoping's, suggestion of how to become powerful. You bide your time and you hide your capabilities, and then you become powerful. I would say Dalit politics front loads its assertion potential. And I just wanted to ask you, what is the implication of this, of assertion being the main political vehicle of your political expression?
Well, assertion alone may not be sufficient because you will certainly get some positions. And we have now Dalits in very important posts because of reservation in the first place. Well, probably only because of reservations. You have Dalit high civil servants, of course, diplomats, but they have asserted themselves individually. Where is the collective assertion? Where is the solidarity? Have these people kept their brothers and sisters who are still in the ghetto in mind? Or are they cut off from these fears of yesterday? Yeah, I would say that we have certainly seen assertiveness, but not collective action. When you look at the farmers' movement, we see a very similar problem. You see caste dividing people again. And that's so painful because it is so easy for the elite groups to continue to dominate when there is this kind of lack of unity.
So I'm heading towards the end of my questions before I so the last 3 or 4 questions from my side.
Very soon, not me.
Yes. So, sir, one aspect of Ambedkar, it's actually criminal to reduce him to caste. He has contributed in so many domains,
Certainly.
but probably he has the most fundamental things to say about that question. That is why even academically we go back to him. Ambedkar is rarely invoked when it comes to India's other decisive fault line, which is the language question. In his books, Thoughts on Linguistic States, Ambedkar had actually recommended that Hindustani should be the common link language between all the different parts of India. And from this, I would like a comment from you about whether the states which have seen linguistic movements, the non-Hindi states, have they been better in terms of the caste equation compared to the states which have not seen? Because my hypothesis is that in language, you find that universal identity where there's a possibility of you going beyond caste. A Maharashtra, a Tamil Nadu, a Kerala, a Karnataka, are they better for the downtrodden when it comes to the caste hierarchy compared to?
I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure because remember, why was he against the redrawing of the Indian map according to the linguistic criterion? For one very good reason. The moment you create Maharashtra for the Marathi speakers, Karnataka for the Kannada speakers, and so on and so forth, you make a territory where one dominant caste rules. And that's what they wanted. The Congress leaders, the party bosses, who of course were all of them, Maratha, Patels, Lingayats, Vokaligas, Redis, Kamas, they were at the helm of vote banks because their caste group was the largest. But these vote banks could be maximized only if the borders of the state coincided with language era where they were speaking. Really. He was absolutely certain that the redrawing of the map along the criterion languages, linguistic criterion, would result in more oppression for the Dalits. And I think he was. Because it was very difficult to dislodge the Marathas from the position of power. And they've been in power for decades. Same with the Patels. So, you look at one state, even in the Indie Belt, of course. So, in that sense, he was close to Nehru because Nehru was also against. And Nehru was against for a similar reason. He said, why should we create mini nations? We are Indian first. But he could not. Yes. Prevail.
Sorry. So, with the rise of the right wing in India, Ambedkar has become a kind of a rallying point for anti-communal forces and secular forces. In fact, the stupendous rise of the right wing in India is seen as a failure of the Gandhian approach to secularism or a Nehruvian approach to secularism. If this is the case, what are the components of an Ambedkarite version of secularism which are different from a Gandhian model or a Nehruvian model?
Well, in the first place, I think it's more because of BJP that BJP won, than because of the others that they won. I mean, it's not necessarily the failure of those who were in office, but the strategy of those who were out of power that explains their success. Post Janta Party phase, RSS decides to build a Hindu vote bank. And they're going to do it by using the Ayodhya issue for 30 years. It's not because of the mistake of Congress, of the mistake of anybody. It's because of their strategy that has changed. So you may argue that, and I'm very much prepared to believe and to agree, that Congress made a mistake by not sticking to the Nehruvian approach that would have made impossible the use of religion in politics. That's true. But how do you make sure, in the context of a non-secularized society, that this reaction of disqualifying, in fact, declaring illegal RSS
Mm.
would not have backfired
Mm.
immediately.
Mm.
Instead, they took many more decades to win. Now, if there is an alternative secular agenda that we can learn from Ambedkar, it has to be, and it was his approach, respectful of all religions. This is the definition of secularism, by the way. Like, secularism is not laicity.
Mm.
Secularism is not separation of religion from, well, exclusion of religion from the public sphere. It is recognition of all the creeds as equal on the ground. That's what he wanted, in a way. Yeah. Do recognize Buddhism as one of the Indian religions, and he insisted on that. Buddhism is one of the Indian religions. One. Two, you need to just implement the constitution. Implement the law that makes it impossible to use religious symbols, religious discourses at the time of election. Why is the election commission allowing so many ideologues to mobilize a community against another community? And in the same vein, make the police do its job. Why don't we have communal riots in West Bengal? Why don't we have lynchings in West Bengal, 35% Muslim? When in the neighboring states, it's a daily, I would say, ritual. Well, politics, of course, but politicians dictate their terms to the police, and the police is now doing the job of the vigilantes and vice versa. So we see a new state in the making, a vigilante state. This is definitely something he would have absolutely resisted. He wanted a neutral state, a state above everybody. Yeah. Not associated with one of the creeds.
Not a partisan.
So that's, well, it is there in his constitution to make Ambedkar's version of secularism alive. Just implement the Indian constitution before it is reformed, before it is amended, because then it will be more difficult. Yes.
Let me just extend this question a bit. Would an Ambedkarite secularism be more interventionist when it comes to dealing with religions? So, for example, would it use the instruments of the state to bring about more of social reform?
Certainly. No, but this is exactly what he wanted. The Hindu Code Bill was something he was asking for years. And he had to give up. He resigned from Nehru's government because Nehru was under pressure from Vallabhbhai Patel first, and after Patel died, from Rajendra Prasad, and from so many other Hindu traditions. So this Hindu Code Bill was cut into 3 parts, and it was passed over 10 years. But this is exactly what he wanted. The reform of society by the state to modernize it. And it doesn't mean that you attack religion. You don't attack Hinduism by giving rights to the Hindu woman and by giving rights to the Hindu girls. This is why Rajendra Prasad was so, I would say, dishonest, because he argued that it was anti-Hinduism. Exactly what we hear these days. Today, you're anti-Hindu the moment you say anything in the name of equality. It's a recognition that hierarchy is inherent in Hinduism if you say something like that. And it may be true, but it is equally true that you can reform religions. Every religion has been reformed. Catholicism has been reformed by Vatican II in the 60s. And you modernize your religion. You give rights to women, to girls, to each and every individual. So yes, that's definitely what he would have done if he had been in charge. And he was so desperate because precisely.
So one of the experiments in Dalit politics, which is often talked about, is Dalit-Muslim unity. And I would say, with the exception of BSP and a few other very small exceptions, that has failed to materialize. Why is that the case? And there's one observation there. When anyone talks of Dalit Muslim unity in Indian politics, it is always Dalit at the top and Muslim on the bottom. Or let's say the Dalit leadership and the Muslim voter. Or the Dalit political leadership and the Muslim religious leadership. Never a Muslim. It's not a coming together of equals.
Yeah.
Do you feel that is the reason why it's not failed to take off?
It may be one of the reasons. Definitely, you can say that Muslims are the new untouchables today, at the bottom of the pyramid. But there are other reasons, I think. One of them is these two groups are also in competition for the spoils that remain. And it's not new. You know, the first major communal riot in Ahmedabad, 1969, is between textile workers and textile workers, because they are laying off people, and those who wanted to get some job were on both sides. So yeah, that's one. Competition for the spoils, what remains. Two, you have this strategy of the Samparishwar of using the Dalit manpower to loot, to attack, to destroy the Babri Masjid. You know, if you can read many books.
Bawar mein Kochi. Why I could not be a Hindu?
Yes, that was a good reason. Because I was sent to destroy this Babri Masjid, and I was left on my own by those who coordinated, organized all that. But it works in the sense that for those who could achieve something, get some recognition as fighters of Hinduism, you can certainly not feel very close to Muslims after that, at the time of voting.
Yes, sir.
Plus communal riots. Communal riots are not between upper caste Hindus and Muslims most of the time, where you have all kinds of rioters. But in many places, it's Dalits versus Muslims. And for the good reason that they live next to each other, because they live at the periphery in the suburb. You know, there is one nala in the middle, that's all.
So the most, I would say, hot question in contemporary Indian politics is the question of the caste census. And it's becoming mainstream day by day. Let us think about the impact of the original census that the British carried out. And it transformed caste in a very fundamental manner. One manner that I can think of is the numbers of each caste group started to matter for the first time in the history of caste as an institution. Okay, your power depends on how strong you are numerically. That was a particularly British census logic that was brought into caste. So in a way, it changed the texture of how caste operates in India. Assuming that a caste census does take place, how do you think it will change the texture of caste and politics this time around?
Well, it will probably have the same impact as the Mondal report. You know, after the Mondal report was finalized, 78, nobody wanted to touch it. But people knew it existed. So they mobilized, they were united to have it implemented. I would say the caste census would probably have the same effect. Many groups want to know how many members of their group there is in their state. Plebeians want to know. The others know already. And they don't want these to be known. And it's the difference. So they will probably mobilize for the caste census to take place for ascertaining their underrepresentation in the power structure. You know, it creates a glue It's a kind of rallying point, centripede kind of dynamic. And that's why the opposition parties are so much in favor of that. And that's why the BJP is so much against that. Because the potential of unity among the plebeians who are not BJP supporters is great on that point.
Yes.
It does not mean that they will remain united the day after.
Yeah.
Remember,
yes,
when Mandal was implemented, the day after, they divided. Yadavs, Lodis, Gujars, Kurmis, and you saw Janata Dal split Samajwadi Party, Samta Dal, now GDU. The day after, 1991, the unity is over. 1990s. Because you fight together for something, and the moment you get it, how do you divide the benefits? Each caste group will want its share. So we may have the same kind of dynamic, but
amplified.
Maybe amplified because that was more a North Indian movement. That will be pan-Indian. Everybody wants to know across the board.
Yes, sir.
Everybody wants to know how underrepresented I am. And this amplification will probably mean that the parties fighting for the caste census will have some upper end. Like in the early 90s when Janata Dal could win Bihar, Uttar Pradesh,
Odisha.
Yes. Now, will they get divided the day after the way these parties, Janata Dal, got divided the day after? This is a very important question because you can't do anything, you can't do any sustainable or sustained development, socio-economic development, if you don't stick together. So something has to be found. For these parties, for these caste groups, to remain united for a socio-economic change.
Yes.
At last. And it's not so easy, really. But the caste census is a kind of, it can play the role of a catalyst.
Yes.
The same way Mondal played the role of a catalyst.
Yes, sir. So, sir, my share of questions done. Before I open it up to the audience here, I have one question from an audience who is joining us.
Okay.
So, it's saying that Ambedkar was is the unrecognized feminist hero when it comes to India.
Sure.
His first text that we talked about unraveled how problems which are considered as gender problems, such as sati, widow remarriage, child marriage, are actually linked to caste. Therefore, the Hindu Code Bill was like a Bill of Rights for women.
Yeah.
However, the ultimate analysis is when it comes to the feminist domain is the slogan of personal is political. So the question is, do you feel that he was a feminist in his own personal life?
I think so. Again, it's a bit unfair to judge the behavior of these people without criteria of the 21st century. So you have to compare.
Yeah.
So if you compare the way he behaved with his wives to the way Mahatma Gandhi behaved with his wife, to the way, well, the list is necessary.
It just goes down on a slope.
He is certainly a feminist in that sense. And he organized women. He was one of those who wanted women to be also in the street fighting. And he had, of course, this connection with caste, saying in the Sanskrit text, Dharma Shastras, of course, the law of Manu and so on, women are seen as Shudras. The impurity of the woman. That's something he fought against, like against any impurity.
Yes. So this is more of a personal question. I would say, sir, that what would you consider as an essential component of an anti-caste manifesto in the 21st century? Something that can be done at an individual level, something that needs to be done at a state level, and something that we need to do as a community, as a society. One point for each.
At the individual level, conversion to Buddhism is something you can get. At the state level, intercaste marriages. I say at the state level because it is at the state level that caste is the most active.
Yes.
So we have a problem now with so many laws making interreligious marriages complicated. Well, to marry out of your group has become, well, it has always been, but it's even more complicated. At the national level,
Social level.
yeah, social level, you know, we still have this ghettoization. So if society could return to or create mixed neighborhoods where you can share the diversity of society, everybody tries to get back to its own small grouping because we eat the same thing, we share the same creed, we have the same lifestyle. Well, you lose the richness of the Indian society.
Yes.
That is its diversity. You live in your housing society. The golden ghetto. This is
It's
the
a
golden
ghetto of the
ghetto
mind.
par excellence. Exactly. So yeah, that's the social, and it goes with urbanism. How do you redo the map of the cities in such a way that not only you mix in your building with others, but you have a bagicha that is sufficiently, you know, organized and located for being the meeting ground of people from all kinds of avenues. Like in a dargah, you know, you go to a dargah, you meet people of all kinds of social background, and you speak to them anonymously because you know you will not see them anymore anyway, so it's easy. This is a humanism. No, by the way, we have not used that word yet. Ambedkar is the ultimate humanist. That's absolutely essential for understanding this. Yeah.
Yes. So I think you use the allegory of a bagicha, which is a garden, and a garden looks lovely only when it has a composition of different flowers,
Yes.
not only a single flower. Yes. So if you have any questions for the audience from the audience here, yeah, please introduce yourself.
Could people who want to ask the question, please come ahead and ask. If the audience online will.
I can repeat it actually.
That would be
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tore. That's actually very simple. One is, I think, for a lot of people, the entry point to understanding caste in India is Ambedkar. And this is not a criticism of Ambedkar as much as it is probably Indian pedagogical practices. Do you think there's an over-reliance on Ambedkar? And that sort of formulates and narrows down the way in which we understand and analytically and normatively understand caste. Does it severely limit the possibility?
It's a great question. It's a great question.
Is in your experience, because when you're writing about caste in French, this is very I don't know how to call this question, but how do you translate the specificities of caste as a lived experience into a completely different language and therefore to a completely different world and an audience? Does it translate the same way? And are there any difficulties that you face in that aspect?
No, these are good questions, excellent questions. Well, the first one, yes, you can say that approaching caste via Ambedkar creates limitations. I would say, but it's also because nobody else wants to speak about it. You know, if someone else wanted to speak about it, we would have alternatives. But for many people, it doesn't exist. For many people, there is no caste anymore in India. No? It's over. So we also fall back on him because he is the one who speaks about it, number one. But number two, yes, there are limitations. And there is one thing that I'm now arguing a lot, and that's my next book, in fact, that I am doing with Kalia Rasa. By focusing so much on caste as the almost only unit of analysis of society, you miss socioeconomic differentiation in two ways. Within caste, there is class. Now, within the Marathas, within the Patels, you have now a socioeconomic differentiation, because many of them have gone to the city, have become traders, have become entrepreneurs, have become contractors, have made money. So class within caste is something we need to use to study, and we should not look at caste only as the unit of analysis. And we should do that, for instance, when you look at the voting pattern. Now we look at the Patel vote. Wow.
Yeah.
There are different kinds of Patels. And we say, okay, Lava Patel, Karva Patel. No, there are different caste of Patels within the Lava Patels and within the Karva Patels, because we have to go beyond this ascriptive identity. So, number one. Number two, when someone from a low caste become rich, and it happens, he may reproduce the kind of domination he has experienced himself, he has suffered from himself. So it's not as if because he belongs to that caste, he will fight inequalities. He may be enjoying inequalities. So you see the kind of equation between I am looking at the way Ambedkar describes caste, make these two other analyses more difficult. They are not really on the radar. To explain in a different language what is written by Indians on the caste system, yes, is challenging, and you have constantly to return to the original words. What is a jati? What does jati mean? What is the root? And by the way, it gives you an idea of the racial dimension. Hindus are not only believers, they are also a people. And they reproduce themselves in jatis. In that sense, we should not completely obliterate the ethnic dimension. So you use these original words, but you also explain. So you were born in a jati, it means that you've married into a jati. You reproduce yourself in a jati. But this jati is on a kind of scale. What is purity? What is impurity? What is shubh? What is why are untouchable achut? So you have to use again the words. They use themselves. But the beauty of social sciences is that it's possible. And we really need to fight against all those who say, oh no, it's you can't understand. No, I've heard that so many times. Oh no. This is something a white man just can't understand. Of course not. We do understand very well. This is the problem. They would prefer us not to understand, because by understanding we can expose. So I'm really now a bit pissed off by this, I would say, post-colonial or decolonial kind of discourse saying, no, you have to think with our categories, and it's only from the inside that you can make these kind of things clear. No, social sciences precisely have the resources for this communication to be made comparative. So you need to use many more words, probably. You give more examples, but there are many examples precisely that can be documented. Plus, of course, not only purity, impurity, and endogamy, but the kind of job you do. No, this is so amazingly hereditary. Where else do you see generations of people doing the same
thing.
job for centuries? Nowhere else. There is no society where you have generations of leather workers, of, name one, lawyers. Everybody is in a hierarchical kind of dynastic mode. So yeah, but that's a very good question.
I would just like to add a point, sir, that our constitutions, let's say Indian constitution does not have, let's say, a dedicated article which talks about press freedoms. We just say, okay, it's just under the right to freedom of expression.
Yeah.
But what we decide to emphasize on depends on what matters to that social context. So I think Indian constitution is unique, where it gives a separate article where it says that no, you can choose any occupation you want, because the social context was that you could not choose the occupation you want. That is why that article is there.
That's why it is a very long constitution.
Yes, sir. The longest. The longest.
Because you have to say all what is possible.
Yes, please.
Thank you, and thank you. I had a question about the interlinks between politics and religion in Ambedkar. Because from his vow in 35 to convert to Buddhism to his conversion in 36, as you said, there's 21 years. And I feel like in his earlier works, earlier talks, he constructs more Buddhism as a kind of political vehicle against Hinduism. From what I've read, so it's not extensive, but from what I read, it's really even the 22 vows as you mentioned. But then after his death, when the Buddha and his Dharma is published, I feel like here there's a bigger emphasis on the religious aspect. So I was wondering whether there was an evolution through his active political career from 35 to 57, where there's a bigger focus on politics, and then whether later he develops the religious.
Yeah, definitely. And he never used religion in politics. But the shift you mentioned is, of course, related to his personal trajectory. As a politician, I would say, is done by 1952. He has tried, and he thinks he has failed. He will certainly not lose interest in politics, and he will give the idea of the RPI, but his art is elsewhere. And it's why probably he will be more spiritual, he will be more, at least spiritually inclined, and will try to find a way, midway, for combining social change and spiritual achievement. Of course, that has political implications, inevitably, huge. But the objective is not directly political. Yeah.
I think his stated goal was to develop a Bible for Buddhism, because there's nothing like a Bible, or there was nothing like the 22 woes.
Yeah.
It's something that he just did on the spot. Somebody else had raised their hand.
Yeah,
Could you introduce that?
my name is Shochitra and I'm coming from Kolkata, West Bengal. I'm studying environmental policy right now in SciencesPo. I had a question regarding Ambedkar's skepticism about the democratic project in India. He had certain qualms and reservations about democracy, and right now, if you see that people don't really vote on the kind of person if he or she is really good for the society, but rather on like religious symbols or caste symbols. Even in Bengal, where I come from, there's so much fear mongering among the electorate. Like some people are not really allowed to vote there. So, do you think like he was right in his skepticism about the democratic project in India? And like, is democracy really possible in the Indian society?
Well, these are two different questions. And the reference to the last one is yes, it is possible in every society. Really, why should some societies be immune to democracy? It's a question of culture. It's a question of education. It's a question of rights. why was he so skeptical? That's a good question. Because he believed in it, but at the same time was not so sure it would work. And I repeat, after the question was passed, he said, now we enter a different game. You know, we have the text. If we don't change society, it will fail. Democracy will fail. But there was one reason in particular which explained this skepticism. Personality cult. He has an amazing page saying, if we continue to follow a quote-unquote charismatic leader blindly, we will not build democracy. Because democracy is rooted in a sense of criticism, a sense of critical mind, autonomy of the person. And that was his main fear, that, of course, he was thinking about Mahatma Gandhi. Because of Mahatma Gandhi, he could not get the separate electorate in 1932. Mahatma Gandhi decided to be on an hunger strike. Everybody rushed to Pune, and he was under so much pressure that he had to give up. And that was probably the thing he regretted the most till the end, because by giving up separate electorate, you do not allow Dalits to be a pressure group, because there is no constituency where they are in a majority. So those who vote in the reserve seats, well, those who are elected in the reserve seats do not report to the Dalit voters and therefore betray them routinely in parliament. He knew. But he could not do anything because Mahatma Gandhi was dying and he had to give up. And why was he so prestigious? Because he had the charisma we all know about. Now you transpose this to the 21st century and you see in a different context how a personality cult is bad for democracy across the world and in India in particular. When you're not even biological, how could you be criticized in the first place? He was very right.
Meher has a question. Would you just pass at the back? Well,
thank you for the talk. It really made me think a lot. So my question is more related to the idea of future shock. I'm not sure if you've already heard of it, but it's basically a concept given by Alvin Toffler about how social mobility is quickening in certain parts of society, which are, say, more urban and more privileged with the resources like technology. And I felt that this was resonating a little bit with what you said about people being torn apart from the inside. So there is a certain amount of timelessness when it comes to the idea of caste, and a certain amount of fixing that is done for various reasons, like an essentialization, even within, say, the queer communities, where the positionality, even in feminism, is used as leverage to state a position. But it also fixes a person within time. So for generations that are now, say, the Gen Z and beyond, that have maybe moved up from previous generations that have seen oppression, how exactly do these internal tears translate into individuals who can act not necessarily as revolutionaries, but maybe as citizens who can assert their humanist positions, say when it comes to an issue like Gaza, beyond.
Yeah. My main concern is we have new people in old positions. I mean, yes, it's not only Savarnas who occupy the decision-making positions, but the new blood, quote unquote, may behave the way the previous ones behaved already. See, so what is fixed is not the people. What is fixed is the frame. And the people change in that frame, but the frame does not change much. So intercaste marriages. Have you seen any progress in intercaste marriages? Well, of course, in Punjab, because of the sex ratio, by default. Same with how the middle class is more than a class. Now, it's a group that valorizes values which are very close to the values on which caste is based. Now, this idea of merit against positive discrimination. Well, when you look at what Dayananda Sarasvati said, Arya Samaj reformists said, no, we are at the top of society as Brahmins because of our gun, because of our qualities. We're not there because of our belt. Well, one way or the other, you get it away. You get away with it. So this is exactly why this society, but it's true of Pakistan, by the way, the whole of Saudi has this amazing capacity of resisting change. The more it changes, the more it remains. So the people are different, the frame remains the same to a large extent. It's remarkable. This is clearly something we could elucidate by using Gramsci's notion of hegemony to some extent, because you manufacture consent constantly. And you manufacture consent precisely by making people believe that, oh, but they are where they should be, and they should not vote. So, this is very challenging, very, very puzzling to see so much change, because there is a lot of change. Urbanization, modernization, economic growth, double digit for 15 years or 10 years. And so little change so far as the way you live are concerned. What you eat, who you marry, who you relate, all this retains a strong capacity to resist change. Yeah.
So there's a question from the audience, audience.
Yeah.
So somebody has quoted Ambedkar where he says that equality is dearer to me than liberty, but fraternity is my final aim. So when we talk about the overlaps and similarity between what Ambedkar aspired and the French Revolution aspired, is it that the relative weight that the French Revolution gave to liberty compared to equality, compared to fraternity, is where the change is happening?
Yeah, no, this is a very interesting differentiation between the three. In Buddhism, he finds fraternity. The Sangha. The Sangha, well, that Sangha, not the one we speak about daily, is a community of equals, but a fraternity in the first place. In a book we edited, in fact, co-edited with Narendra Kumar, we insist on this a lot. When you look at his writings on democracy, he keeps saying what matters the most is mutual respect. We form a body politic. And the notion of the body comes back constantly. Because in Hinduism, you have this metaphor of the body. Virat Purush sacrifices himself, and the mouth becomes the Brahmins, and the arm becomes the Kshatriyas, and the hand the Vaish, and the legs the Shud. Well, this metaphor of the body is hierarchical. And he says we have to have a body that is
fused.
Yeah. Fusion is one of the words he used repeatedly. So
it makes sense. Dalits are kept at arm's length. You don't touch them. To be touched by others, exactly what Rahul Gandhi did during his judgment, and exactly what others did, is exactly the kind of symbolic gesture that makes the most significant difference. Liberty, equality, that's very abstract. To be touched, this is Holi. What is Holi? The carnivalesque festival. When you touch everybody, our servants love that. This is a moment when you are really inverting, and the wife can beat his husband. For example. Yeah, and
It's a very Haryana thing, but
well, they deserve it.
so, sir, please.
Something quite, maybe not exactly in the subject, but did Ambedkar reacted to the Shoah, the elimination of Jews considered as undermanned exactly as the untouchables were or are in India too, in India? You have anything on the subject?
No. Very good question. I have no idea, but he must have said something about it. He would not miss it, obviously. 44, 45. Well, he was. But the thing is, he was not traveling anymore. This is something, by the way, many Indian politicians missed after studying abroad. When they came back, they usually did not leave the country again during the British Raj. But even if he did not travel to Europe again, he read the newspapers. So he was, of course, aware of the Shoah. What is said about it, I have no idea. It's a good question. Yeah, we should investigate. Yeah, if you know.
So, in one of his unpublished books, it's called A People at Bay, where he actually does a comparative assessment of all the oppressed people of the world with the untouchable community. So he talks about the Black American community, and he also talks about the Jewish question. But he talks about it more in a historical context. The context of Hitler is there, but it's not a new problem.
Yeah.
So it's a the text is called as People at Bay. And I would say a larger point here is that the problem was happening when he was living, right? When he was it was happening around him, and therefore the right place to look for such a submission is not in his books or texts, but probably his journalistic pieces. And the problem with a lot of English, the Western academia who study Ambedkar is that they don't know Marathi.
Yeah, he wrote Marathi.
And his journalism is Marathi.
Yeah.
So probably you will find, I'm pretty sure maybe I can help you with that. But so that mention is in his journalistic work, not in his academic work.
But indeed, the similarities between the Jews and the Dalits are striking when you look at the medieval European situation of the Jews who had to stick to some professions, who had to live in some places. You know where the word ghetto come from? Ghetto come from this island of Venice, where the Jews had to live, ghetto. So when he has this book, Untouchable Children of the Ghetto,
Yes,
it's exactly in arcing back to the Jews condition.
if I may just ask one question, sir. Does anybody have a question?
Some question.
Yeah. And just ask one last question. Is that Ambedkar prioritized morality in for him? Not only the political, but morality is a central piece of how a good life is to be built.
Yeah.
And therefore he chose Buddhism because he found it to be the most moral religion in the Indian context. And when he talks about morality, he's not talking about an individual morality that I may have with someone. He says that we need to have a shared morality. Okay. And a shared morality can only be generated with an institution such as religion. It's one of his conclusions. So in the 21st century, we have a lot of these complex problems. I'm also a student of environmental policy, and it seems as if none of the problems are going to be solved if we are going to think in ghettos in that sense, not as individuals, not as nations, but we need a shared morality. Therefore, what do you think about the role of religion, any religion, in solving contemporary global issues?
Well, it's very difficult today to find a religion that can give a universal morality, because wars of religions are such that before you embrace the religion of the other, it takes some time. But if there is one religion that can play that role, it's Buddhism, clearly, because it's also a philosophy more than, as much as a religion. So you can certainly continue to worship your gods and share a Buddhist kind of morality, especially for saving the planet. Yeah.
Yes. Can we take a couple of more questions?
Yes. 7 already. One question there also. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Can we take one from the audience first?
Yeah.
This is okay. They can speak.
Yeah.
They can speak.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. My question might be more like on a different territory. So, is like does Ambedkar talk about like diasporas, Indo-diasporas, and Hindu diasporas as well, when he talks about like the caste system? Because I'm referring here to Mauritius, which is today a majority of Indo-diaspora people, and is really targeted by Narendra Modi in the aspects of culture, and also Hinduism and caste, which was a really strong topic till the independence of Mauritius in 1968. And today, you still have kind of a renewal of this topic of caste, like who is a Hindu, who is not, and especially between Tamil people and Bhojpuri people, because it's the second biggest diaspora in Mauritius. So did he talk about that, or did he like predict something about them? Because when they migrated to Mauritius, it was still like a colony from the British people, as was India. So yeah.
I don't have any text on the diaspora. But I see the point you made regarding the, if you want, redefinition of caste identity along with the Hindu identity in the diaspora. It's everywhere. It's in the US, it's in Canada, it's in the UK, it's in Australia, it's everywhere. And indeed, it's part of this new sense of belongingness to a Hindu community. Maybe not Hinduism, but temples play a big role there. The Akshardham temples, the Swaminarayan temples, the Babs temples playing a big role there. It's very interesting. It shows that when you feel more Hindu, you also revalorize caste. It's very difficult to finally be Hindu abstractly, which is exactly what he said. In that sense, he was very true. You know, this is the problem when you want to reconvert to Hinduism. Where do you go? Because reconversion, homecoming, Garvapsi, welcome, but welcome where? It's, I think, very revealing. You can say we are back to Ambedkar 1916, which is fascinating. To say something that is still true 100 years after, because you have identified a key point. Yeah, it is great, definitely. But to study the diaspora is key these days.
I just wanted to begin with. I think it's unfair to put so much burden on Ambedkar on everything. So he did a lot. He did a lot, whatever he can. but I feel that he was a negotiator all his life. He was negotiating within class and caste, and then within this whole idea of priest education and to temple to be placed to be certain education, because he was talking about Dalit, and then he was talking about Hindu reforms in within the religion and all sort of things. About Buddhism, I think he made mistake. He should have done it very early, and that could be followed a massive. Why I'm saying this, because of a lot of Dalits in India through Sufism, they convert to Islam, and their position is very different compared to in terms of socialization, cultural. Although definitely in Muslims in India also they follow certain castes, Ashraf, Azlaf, and all this, but there is no violence as such which you can see from your naked eye. So I think to in that context, and plus, and the other question is the right now how BJP is playing all this. What exactly they did in first UP election when they have the majority? They separated the Mayawati caste. I forget. Jatav from an other caste. They did around, I think, thousands of Jati Sabhas, caste meetings, and they organized the other caste, other OBCs other than Yadavs, and other Dalits other than Jatavs, and that's what they're doing caste. And now in Maharashtra, this whole slogan, "Ek hai to safe hai," we are one, we are safe, and you know which one is excluded and which was included. So I think the whole idea of this Hindu identity as per se, and we are the actors we are admiring in the last month, and now the actors are talking about the same thing. Hindu identity is coming back. We back to the civilization, old Hindu civilization, and this whole identity is so problematic because there is no oppression in that. There is no caste or any kind of sort of oppression. So I think.
No, the idea that delayed the conversion for too long, certainly. But it's not as if he was not under pressure. He was under huge pressure. And when the Hindu Mahasabha realized that he had that plan of converting to the religion, B.S. Munjay, who was the mentor of Ed Kevor, the founder of RSS, related to M.C. Raja, who was the other Dalit leader, who was also in the roundtable conferences, to have an alternative plan to counter his own strategy. So he was not in a vacuum. And remember, this is exactly the moment when Mahatma Gandhi started the Arijan movement, anti-intouchability movement. And till the late 30s, Ambedkar had not lost all hope in reform of Hinduism. So to convert was a very radical decision to make that he preferred to delay. Retrospectively, we can say it was a mistake, but at that time, it was difficult to do otherwise.
Just to conclude, sir.
Yes.
With the choice of Buddhism, I think it's very difficult to appropriate the socio-religious aspect of his personality because it's on your face. Okay, it's like in a way he just he threw something away and he accepted. So it's difficult to appropriate the social and religious, I would say, dimension of Ambedkar. But just like a conversion to Buddhism is a lasting socio-religious statement. Do you feel that the political appropriation of Ambedkar is easier because there was no similar lasting political statement which basically clears all doubts of where he stood?
This idea of appropriation, I know people try hard, but none of them really succeed. No, remember, 2014,
2015, 2016, Narendra Modi inaugurates an Ambedkar museum, speaks about Ambedkar all the time. 2024, game over. No, because you can't appropriate him. If you use him, you have to refer to him, and if you refer to him, he says the opposite of what you claim he said. So he will remain this kind of anchorage point, this kind of guide. Now, of course, it would be better if people did what he recommended. At last.
This will end the session.
Yes. May I just ask our co-founder?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Sure. Yes. Thanks to the Indo-French Circle for organizing this. Yes, making this possible. Thanks.
To both of you.
Yes.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. We hope that you found today's round of discussion and seminar to be meaningful and insightful. The events would not have been possible without the invaluable insights of Professor Christophe Jaffrelot and the written organization by Mr. Anish Tore. Thank you so much. And also our own side who helped run all of this. I really had to get work, so thank you so much, side. For your efforts towards the success. Though Dr. Ambedkar pursued his studies at LSE in Columbia, he unfortunately never had the chance to engage with SciencesPo. And unfortunately, many students here would say that they have not had the opportunity to engage with this work more actively here. So we hope that this avenue has helped with that. Nevertheless, today's conference serves to honor his contributions and bring his visionary work into sharper focus within our academic environment, an institution where his name and ideas deserve far more prominence, particularly given his towering role towards social justice and equality, which also values that SciencesPo wants to further promote. This homage to Dr. Ambedkar is not only an attempt to deepen our understanding of entrenched systematic inequalities, but also a step towards integrating his ideas into mainstream discourses here at SciencesPo, particularly among those unfamiliar with this profound legacy. We also hope that today's dialogue has fostered a greater awareness of the social change and collectivity he aimed to champion across India for all marginalized people. May this serve as one of the many steps in building a society more attuned to the realities of social justice and conscious of the imperative to act for fundamental, enduring transformation. And finally, that's exactly what our circle also aims to promote. We remain committed to fostering intellectual and social connections across diverse communities that we have represented here at SciencesPo through the increased participation of Indian students and Indian diaspora students as well. Thank you for coming. We will continue to organize events such as these that build awareness, encourage thoughtful dialogue, and strengthen ties between our community, both Indian and French. And thank you all once again for joining us today. And we look forward to having more alliances with you and more discussions such as this. Thank you.
If I may add, congratulations. Because we've tried hard for decades to have this kind of gathering, and I'm glad at last it crystallizes. Make sure that it is open to everybody, all the lovers of India. South Asia, even. Yes, again, South Asian lovers. And the other thing I wanted to say is simply we have events on our agenda, and you're most welcome to these events. Tomorrow we have Deepak Nair, former VC of DU, talking about the Indian economy. I'm not sure it will fit in all of you, but please come and see 2:30 tomorrow at Série 28 Rue des Saints-Pères. And more importantly, we'll have one great session on Indian Muslims by Mukulika Banerjee from the LSE precisely on the 16th of December 5 to 7. That will be an interesting, anthropological approach of what it is to be a Muslim in India today.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank
that.
you. Yeah.
I'll just give the floor 1 second to Sanjeev, that's who you know, who is in India
Oh,
now.
of course, Bangalore.
Yes, it's Bangalore.
I know.
You just want to say a word for the students who are actually from India on how to reach us for interview.
But we have to make it the room at
Yes.
15.
Yes.
The class coming.
Thank you for your attention.
Right. I won't take more of your time because it's been a very long evening for those of you in Paris and an even longer evening for us in India. But thank you, Prof, for doing this event. It's been extremely insightful listening to you as always. Thank you, Anish, as well for sort of taking the leading role on organizing this and the entire Indo-French team. For those of you who don't know about the Indo-French Alumni Circle, please do check us out on our social media handles. Talk to those in the room. Do connect with us. We'd love to stay in touch and support you in any way possible, not only fostering conversations like this, but also helping you advance academically, professionally, anything you guys need. We're always there for you. So please do reach out to us. And once again, to everyone, thanks for coming.
Thank you, Sanjay, and see you at your show next month.
Yes, see you, Prof.
No, I was. It was.